Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the person staring back at you in the mirror is a complete stranger. Not because you've aged overnight, but because you suddenly realize that every opinion you hold, every decision you make, every word you speak isn't truly yours. It belongs to someone else. Your boss, your spouse, your children, the media, society itself. You've become a puppet, dancing to invisible strings. And the most terrifying part? You never even noticed when someone else took control of the performance. Carl Jung once observed something that would shake the foundations of how we understand ourselves. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But what if the self you're trying to accept isn't even yours? What if decades of subtle manipulation have carved away pieces of your authentic soul until you're left with nothing but a hollow echo of who you were meant to be? This isn't about the obvious manipulation, the used car salesman or the telemarketer. This is about something far more sinister and sophisticated. It's the manipulation that whispers so softly you mistake its voice for your own thoughts. It's the kind that doesn't steal your wallet, it steals your very essence. Here's the paradox that will haunt you. The more successful this manipulation becomes, the less aware of it you are. Like a frog slowly boiling in water, you adapt to each subtle increase in control until you're completely cooked and you never even felt the heat. Think about the last major decision you made. Was it truly yours? Or was it the inevitable result of years of conditioning, expectations, and psychological pressure so expertly applied that you believed you were choosing freely? Jung understood that most people sleepwalk through life, unconscious of the powerful forces shaping their thoughts and actions. But for those with the courage to wake up, to peer behind the curtain of their own consciousness, a shocking revelation awaits. The question isn't whether you're being manipulated. You are. The question is, are you ready to see how deep this goes? And more importantly, are you brave enough to fight back and reclaim the person you were always meant to be? If this resonates with you, if you're ready to embark on this journey of psychological liberation, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. This is just the beginning of a transformation that could change everything you thought you knew about yourself. Jung discovered something that the manipulators of his time and ours desperately hoped would remain hidden. The human psyche operates on two levels. There's the conscious mind, which believes it's in control, and the unconscious, which actually runs the show. Manipulation succeeds not by convincing your conscious mind, but by infiltrating your unconscious. Arthur Schopenhauer, decades before Jung, identified this vulnerability when he wrote that a man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. The manipulator's art lies in shaping what you want without you realizing your desires have been planted by someone else. Think about how this works in practice. A skilled manipulator doesn't argue with your conscious reasoning. They bypass it entirely. They create emotional states, trigger unconscious patterns, and activate what Jung called complexes, autonomous clusters of psychological energy that can hijack your rational mind. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us about the will to power that drives human behavior, but he failed to fully recognize how this will could be co-opted and redirected. Jung saw deeper. He understood that when people don't individuate, when they don't become conscious of their own unconscious patterns, they become fertile ground for external control. The manipulation begins early and operates through what Jung termed the collective unconscious. Society, family, institutions, they all contribute to creating what Nietzsche might have called herd morality. But Jung understood as something more insidious, the internalization of external voices that gradually replace your authentic inner voice. Here's where it gets philosophically terrifying. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free, that we must take full responsibility for our choices. But what if those choices aren't really ours? What if we're experiencing what Sartre never fully grasped, the illusion of freedom, while being systematically stripped of authentic choice? Viktor Frankl, who understood suffering in ways most cannot fathom, identified that humans' primary drive is not pleasure or power, but meaning. Manipulators exploit this by offering you ready-made meaning systems that serve their purposes, not yours. They don't just steal your decisions, they steal your very sense of purpose and replace it with theirs. Jung's concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, becomes a weapon in the manipulator's arsenal. By keeping you unconscious of your own psychological patterns, your fears, your unmet needs, they can trigger these shadow elements to control your behavior. You react instead of respond, and in that reactivity, you lose yourself. The philosophical weight of this is staggering. Aldous Huxley, in his prescient work, warned of a brave new world where control would be achieved not through force, but through conditioning. Jung provided the psychological roadmap, showing exactly how this conditioning penetrates the human psyche. But here's what makes this particularly cruel for those who have lived longer and experienced more. You accumulate not just wisdom over the decades, but also wounds. Each betrayal, each disappointment, each moment when someone took advantage of your trust creates psychological scar tissue. Skilled manipulators read this emotional terrain like a map, knowing exactly which old wounds to press to get the response they want. The tragedy is that your life experience, which should be your greatest defense against manipulation, can become your greatest vulnerability when someone understands how to weaponize your emotional history against you. Jung called this process psychological infection, the way unconscious material from one person can colonize another's psyche. What we're dealing with isn't just individual manipulation. It's a cultural epidemic of psychological colonization where authentic selves are systematically replaced with manufactured personas designed to serve others' agendas. The question becomes, if the very foundation of your identity has been compromised, how do you even begin to distinguish between your authentic voice and the chorus of external influences that have been masquerading as your own thoughts? The most devastating aspect of psychological manipulation isn't what it takes from you, it's what it makes you become. When you live as an echo of others' expectations rather than an expression of your authentic self, you don't just lose your identity. You become complicit in your own spiritual assassination. Jung observed that when people suppress their authentic nature for too long, it doesn't simply disappear. It goes underground and emerges as neurosis, depression, anxiety, and what he called the unlived life. Your psyche rebels against the foreign programming, but since you're unconscious of what's happening, you experience this rebellion as inexplicable suffering. Think about the cognitive bias psychologists call choice supportive bias, our tendency to remember chosen options as better than they actually were. Manipulators exploit this by making you believe their imposed choices were your decisions. Over time, you become invested in defending choices that were never truly yours, creating a fortress of false justifications around a life that fundamentally betrays who you are. The neurological reality is even more disturbing. Neuroscientists' research shows that repeated patterns of thought and behavior literally rewire the brain. When you consistently act against your authentic nature, you don't just feel different, you become different at a biological level. The neural pathways that once connected you to your true self atrophy from disuse, while new pathways that serve others' agendas strengthen. This creates what Jung would recognize as a false self, a persona so thoroughly constructed to meet external demands that you forget it's a mask. The tragedy is that this false self becomes self-perpetuating. You start attracting relationships, opportunities, and circumstances that reinforce the manufactured version of yourself, making it increasingly difficult to remember who you really are. The social consequences ripple outward in ways you might never connect to the original manipulation. When you're not authentic, you can't form authentic relationships. You attract people who benefit from your false self, or who are equally disconnected from their own authenticity. This creates what systems theorists call complementary neuroses, relationships that maintain themselves through mutual psychological dysfunction. Consider the profound loneliness that many experience despite being surrounded by people. This isn't accidental. It's the inevitable result of connections based on false presentations of self. You can't be truly known when you don't know yourself, and you can't truly connect when you're operating from a manufactured personality designed to please others rather than express your genuine nature. The manipulation also creates what Nietzsche warned against: resentment. But this isn't just resentment toward the manipulators. It's a deeper, more corrosive resentment toward yourself for allowing it to happen. This self-resentment becomes a toxin that poisons every aspect of your experience, making you more susceptible to further manipulation as you seek relief from the psychological pain you can't even fully identify. Perhaps most cruelly, the manipulation often succeeds by co-opting your genuine desire to be good, to be helpful, to be loved. The manipulator doesn't turn you into someone you hate. They turn you into a distorted version of who you aspire to be. This makes resistance feel like betrayal of your own values, creating a psychological trap that's extraordinarily difficult to escape. The cultural impact extends beyond individual suffering. When populations of people lose touch with their authentic selves, entire societies become malleable to larger forms of manipulation. Political, commercial, ideological. The personal becomes political, not through choice, but through the systematic erosion of the capacity for authentic choice. Jung understood that this process creates what he called mass man, individuals so disconnected from their inner guidance that they become susceptible to collective possession by ideas, movements, and leaders that promise to fill the void where their authentic self once resided. The most insidious consequence is that this manipulation programs you to manipulate others. Having lost touch with your own authentic desires and needs, you begin unconsciously pressuring others to fulfill roles in your life that you don't even realize you're imposing. The victim becomes the perpetrator, often without awareness, spreading the psychological infection to the next generation. But recognition of the problem contains the seed of its solution. Jung's revolutionary insight was that consciousness itself is the antidote to manipulation, but not the superficial consciousness that thinks it already knows everything. The deep, often uncomfortable consciousness that's willing to confront the shadow of your own complicity in your manipulation. The first act of rebellion is what Jung called active imagination, learning to distinguish between thoughts that arise from your authentic core and those that have been programmed by external influences. This requires developing what might seem like an impossible skill: observing your own mind as if you were a neutral scientist studying a fascinating but unfamiliar organism. When a thought arises, especially one that drives you toward action, pause and ask, where did this thought come from? Does it serve my authentic nature, or does it serve someone else's agenda? This sounds simple, but it's revolutionary because most people never question the origin of their own thoughts. They assume that because a thought appears in their consciousness, it must be theirs. Viktor Frankl, who maintained his authenticity even under the most extreme manipulation in Nazi concentration camps, discovered that between stimulus and response lies a space, and in that space lies your freedom. The manipulator's power depends on eliminating that space, creating automatic responses that bypass conscious choice. Reclaiming that space is reclaiming your sovereignty. Jung's concept of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who others expect you to be, requires what he called holding the tension of opposites. This means being willing to disappoint people whose approval you've been programmed to seek, even when that disappointment triggers intense psychological discomfort. Here's where it gets counterintuitive. The path to freedom often requires becoming temporarily more isolated, not less. As you stop automatically conforming to others' expectations, you may find that some relationships were entirely dependent on your false compliance. This social pruning, while painful, is necessary for creating space for authentic connections. The rebellion also requires what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate, but applied in a Jungian context. This means accepting and even embracing the aspects of yourself that the manipulators taught you to reject or suppress. Your anger, your boundaries, your unconventional thoughts, your refusal to be convenient for others, these aren't flaws to be managed, but aspects of your authentic self to be reclaimed. Jung emphasized the importance of integrating the shadow, those parts of yourself you've been conditioned to deny. Often, what you've been taught to suppress contains exactly the energy you need to resist manipulation. Your selfishness, properly understood, becomes healthy self-preservation. Your stubbornness becomes valuable persistence. Your rebellion becomes necessary authenticity. The practice of saying no becomes a spiritual discipline, not because no is inherently better than yes, but because if you can't say no, your yes has no meaning. Manipulators rely on people who have lost the capacity for genuine refusal. Reclaiming this capacity is reclaiming your power. Jung also understood the importance of finding what he called the transcendent function, a connection to something larger than the social matrix that seeks to define you. This might be nature, art, spirituality, or simply the deeper patterns of your own psyche. This connection provides an alternative source of meaning and value that isn't dependent on others' approval. The rebellion requires developing what could be called psychological immunity, the ability to recognize manipulation attempts in real time and respond from your center rather than react from your conditioning. This immunity grows stronger with practice, like a muscle that develops through resistance training. Perhaps most importantly, the rebellion involves grieving. You must mourn the person you might have been if you had never been manipulated, while simultaneously celebrating the person you're becoming as you break free. This grief isn't weakness. It's the emotional acknowledgement of what authentic selfhood costs and why it's worth every price you pay to reclaim it. The ultimate rebellion is becoming so authentically yourself that manipulation attempts simply bounce off like arrows hitting armor. You become unmovable, not through rigidity, but through deep-rootedness in your own truth. Here is the truth that Jung spent his lifetime trying to reveal. The truth that changes everything once you truly grasp it. You were never meant to be fixed, completed, or perfected by external forces. You were meant to be discovered, expressed, and lived from within. The supreme realization is that manipulation only works because it exploits a fundamental misunderstanding about human nature itself. You've been taught to believe that you need others to tell you who you are, what you should want, how you should think and feel. But Jung discovered that every human being contains within themselves a complete blueprint for their own authentic expression, what he called the self with a capital S. This self isn't the ego that can be manipulated, flattered, threatened, or controlled. It's the deeper organizing principle of your psyche that knows, without external validation, what serves your authentic development and what doesn't. The manipulator's power dissolves the moment you reconnect with this inner knowing. The revelation that shakes everything. You don't need to become someone else to be worthy of love, respect, and belonging. You need to unbecome everything you're not. The stripping away of false identities isn't loss, it's archaeology, uncovering the treasure that was always there beneath the accumulated layers of others' expectations. Jung understood that individuation isn't about becoming independent of all social influence. That would be psychosis, not health. It's about becoming conscious of which influences serve your authentic development and which ones exploit your unconscious patterns for others' benefit. You become discriminating rather than resistant, wise rather than merely rebellious. The most profound shift occurs when you realize that your authentic self isn't a fixed thing to be discovered once and then defended. It's a dynamic, ever-evolving expression of consciousness that continues to unfold throughout your lifetime. This means that manipulation attempts actually become opportunities for deeper self-discovery as you use them to clarify what you're not. Here's what changes everything. When you stop trying to be who others need you to be, you discover that you become far more genuinely useful to the world. Your authentic gifts emerge naturally, your real contributions become possible, and your capacity for genuine love, not people-pleasing, expands exponentially. The manipulators lose their power not because you become hostile to them, but because you become indifferent to their opinion of you. They can no longer push your buttons because you've disconnected the wires. They can no longer trigger your reactions because you've integrated the shadow material they were exploiting. Jung's final insight was that becoming authentic doesn't make you less connected to others. It makes connection possible for the first time. When you stop performing versions of yourself designed to get approval, you can finally meet other people who are also willing to show up authentically. The loneliness of the false self is replaced by the profound intimacy of genuine encounter. The supreme truth contains a beautiful paradox. The moment you stop needing others to complete you, you become capable of genuine love. When you stop looking for external validation, you become capable of offering real support. When you stop trying to be perfect for others, you become perfectly yourself. This is your birthright, reclaimed. This is your sovereignty, restored. This is your life, finally lived from the inside out rather than the outside in. The manipulators can keep their illusions of control. You have something infinitely more powerful, the unshakable knowledge of who you are and the courage to live that truth regardless of who approves or disapproves. Jung believed that the goal of human life is to become conscious, and consciousness is always a choice. Choose to see through the manipulation. Choose to reclaim your authentic voice. Choose to live as the irreplaceable, unrepeatable expression of consciousness that you were always meant to be. The rebellion is complete when you realize it was never a rebellion at all. It was a homecoming. This is your invitation to share your own journey toward authenticity in the comments below. What manipulation patterns have you recognized in your own life? How has the process of reclaiming your authentic self unfolded for you? Subscribe to continue this conversation and like this video if it resonated with your own path to psychological freedom.